One of the ground reference maneuvers you will definitely need to perform on a private pilot check ride is turns around a point. This maneuver demonstrates a student's ability to divide attention between the flight path, ground references, and flight controls, while also demonstrating an understanding and awareness that the radius of a turn is correlated to the bank angle, and also how to manage that bank angle to correct for ground speed changes in order to maintain a constant radius turn. So the goal of turns around a point is to circle around a ground reference point and to maintain a constant radius in the turn. If a turn around a point is done correctly, the flight path should form a perfect circle around the reference point with constant radius turns. In a perfect world with no wind, this would be pretty simple. Establish a bank that holds the reference point off the side of the aircraft and hold that established bank. It'd be constant through the entire turn. But unfortunately, real life isn't this simple. Realistically, there's going to be wind that can affect the airplane's ground speed, and in turn causes the radius of a turn to change if that bank angle isn't adjusted to compensate for that said wind. So let me explain. We start the maneuver on the downwind, or with the wind at our tail. If we were to enter the turn around the reference point and not vary our bank angle, the wind's going to slowly push the aircraft away from the point if it's a tailwind, or if the turn shifts towards a headwind, the wind will push the aircraft towards the reference point. The result is a circle that looks more like an oval, or the circles just begin to overlap and push the aircraft over a distance. So to correct for this, we need to vary the bank based on the ground speed, which is affected by the wind. So when we start the maneuver in the downwind, when we initiate the first turn, we will have a tailwind. So to keep the wind from blowing us too far from the reference point, we will start the maneuver with a steep bank. Our ground speed is higher due to that tailwind, so the steeper bank ensures the radius doesn't get expanded too far and push us away from the reference point. You'll notice though, as we continue the turn, the tailwind will slowly begin to change into a crosswind and then eventually a headwind. To keep the wind from pushing us then back into the reference point, we need to then shallow out the bank. This compensates for the wind trying to push us towards the reference point. So let's kind of summarize. When we have a tailwind, we have a steeper bank, and when we have a headwind, we have a shallower bank. So let's kind of see how this plays out in action. Before we begin the maneuver, let's first select a suitable reference point to use during the maneuver. Objects like small buildings, water towers, or in our case, a little small island out in a lake are great. Just make sure your reference point is easy to distinguish and not too large. We'll do our pre-maneuver checklist before starting and also perform clearing turns to ensure the area is clear of traffic. For our airspeed, we just want to make sure we are at or below VA, our maneuvering speed for our aircraft. For altitude, we want to be between 600 and 1,000 feet AGL. 800 feet is a good middle ground, but in this video we ended up flying at about 1,000 feet AGL. Also trim the aircraft for hands-off level flight before you begin the maneuver. Now just a quick note before we fly this maneuver in the simulator. For some reason, the replay feature in the simulator doesn't reflect the turn coordinator properly, it just is inaccurate. So for this video, just ignore the turn indicator and don't look at it. But do remember during this maneuver to keep yourself coordinated through the entire turn. So for this first demonstration, we're going to do the maneuver with no wind to give just a quick overview of what the maneuver actually looks like. Remember, theoretically, because there's no wind, we shouldn't have to vary the bank angle. So we'll start with the reference point off our wing. Usually a quarter mile to a half a mile away is a good distance to be from the reference point. We want to be close enough that our bank isn't too shallow, but we also want to make sure we're not too close where our bank is too steep. We want the steepest bank we utilize to be no more than 45 degrees. A thing to keep in mind during this maneuver is we're losing the vertical component of lift because we're transferring it to horizontal component of lift. So make sure you add in back elevator pressure to keep us from losing altitude. As you can see, with no wind, it's fairly easy to keep the radius constant as we perform this turn. We'll complete a full 360 turn around the point before rolling back out to wings level as we fly out on the heading we originally began the maneuver on. Seems simple, right? With no wind, of course. But let's make this a little more realistic. Let's add in 10 knots of wind. So now we'll start the maneuver on the downwind with the wind coming from our tail. As the reference point comes off the edge of the wing, we'll begin to initiate our turn. Remember, because we have a tailwind, we need to have a steep initial bank to prevent the wind from blowing us too far away from the point. As you perform the maneuver, be sure to divide your attention back and forth between inside and outside the aircraft. Watch the reference point, but also be sure to scan back inside at your instruments. We want to make sure we're not losing airspeed or altitude. Remember, we got to hold our altitude during this maneuver. As we finish the first 90 degrees of the turn, we will now have a direct crosswind. So this means the aircraft will likely be crabbed into the wind. With this in mind, don't be alarmed if the reference point doesn't feel like it's perfectly off your wing. That's totally fine because we have crab that we're crabbing into the wind. But as we pass through that 90-degree point of the turn, that crosswind's now going to begin shifting to a headwind. This means we need to begin shallowing out our bank to prevent the wind from blowing us back towards the reference point and keeping that constant radius. When we reach that 180-degree point of the turn, we should be in a direct headwind, so we can also expect not to have any more crab due to the wind. So for the first 180 degrees of the turn, we started with a steep bank and transitioned to shallow bank. Now for the second 180 degrees, we will start with a shallow bank and transition to a steep bank. As you continue around the turn, the wind transitions from, again, a headwind to a tailwind. So we'll steepen the bank to compensate for the increase in ground speed. As we continue the turn and reach our original heading, we'll roll out with wings level and fly out on that initial entry heading that we flew in on. And that is how you perform turns around a point. So let's recap. Theoretically, if there was no wind, our bank angle would be constant through the entire turn, but this isn't a perfect world. So the key points to remember are these. The stronger the wind, the more bank angle will have to be varied throughout the maneuver. The steepest bank is when we begin the maneuver with a tailwind that slowly transitions to a shallow bank in the headwind, and then again back to the steep bank as we transition back to a tailwind from the headwind. Some quick tips also how to nail this maneuver. Set yourself up for success. Make sure your aircraft is trimmed before you begin the maneuver so you don't have to be fighting the flight controls throughout the maneuver. Make sure you pick a clear, identifiable point so you don't lose sight of it during the maneuver as well. Get ahead of the aircraft. When you understand at what point in the turn you need to do what with your bank, you can anticipate the turn and prepare for it. So understanding we start with a steep bank means we can anticipate it at the beginning of the turn. And then understanding at the 180-degree point we're going to have the shallowest bank, it makes it much easier to be proactive with this maneuver rather than reactive. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We have more maneuver videos coming that can help you guys just nail those maneuvers on your private check ride. Be sure to drop a like if you learned something, and also subscribe to keep up to date when we upload new videos. Thanks you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.